Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode here in season three. Wow, it's season three already of the Top Cyber Pro podcast. We've already had a lot of great guests so far in the season, and we're continuing the trend. We have Grant Ongers. Did I get that right? With the
Yep.
S. We have Grant Ongers that's going to talk a little bit about OWASP. He's going to talk about other things initiatives that he works on. He does a lot in cybersecurity. So we're going to cover a lot of ground, but without wasting any time, let me turn it over to Grant to just kind of introduce himself to you and talk a little bit about what he does on a daily basis, which is nothing short of incredible.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Grant Ongers. I quite often am referred to as the OWASP guy if I'm in the room with other people, mainly because, as Jim mentioned, I'm very heavily involved with OWASP. Spent some time on the board, am still involved with board activities through the compliance committee, and am involved with plenty of projects, some of which hopefully we'll get to talk about today. The other thing I'm well known for is a beard, which everyone can see is conspicuously missing at the moment.
Oh,
It is Movember, people. Get out there and support the people growing mustaches and support the Cancer Foundation in any way you can.
so
Hopefully the beard will come back though, Jim.
no worries. So yeah, it's a great call. So thank you for highlighting that and putting shining a light on that. And when I reach out to you, Grant, obviously, you're known in the industry as the OWASP guy. So let's just start with people that are just now hearing the first time about OWASP. What is OWASP? What's its mission, and kind of what are some of the things that it's doing for industry?
So to start with, OWASP was the open uh, web application security project. It's now the open worldwide application security project because it's no longer just web apps. It deals with a whole bunch of things, especially now things like LLM and AI and all that sort of thing. OWASP is involved in that space too. Most well known for the top 10, although the top 10 team hate the fact that that's what they're most well known for.
Yeah.
In fact, the top 10 team have, for the most part, come together and built the very first version of the ASVS because everyone says build things to make sure that you avoid the top 10 and you're building good software. Perhaps I should start there. OWASP is all about, it's an open source community, all about building better software. So there's a bunch of projects that help developers to do that and help security teams to measure and evaluate software against security. The top 10, well known. Every 3 or 4 years, there's a new version. They spend a bit of time collecting data and then they aggregate their data and then publish the results. The top 10 team have, well, they learned, I guess, when was it? 2007, maybe a little later than that, that the PCI data security standard was incorporating the top 10 as this is the things you do to avoid bad software. Because the team went, no, 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 no. This is just like showing you what could go wrong. And these are the top 10, but number 11 could totally wreck your business.
Yep.
So instead, ASVS is what they're pushing for. And I firmly stand behind the ASVS as well. It's the application security verification standard. It's kind of a list of things that you need to do in order to ensure that your software is secure. A little more than just a list because there's quite a bit of guidance behind it. And it's a great way to also test whether the software is secure. Crest actually offers certification for pen testing companies who test against the OVS, the OWASP verification standard, according to Crest, which is actually literally just applying ASVS or MASVS testing guidance to pen tests. So yeah, that's what OWASP does. It tries to provide communities. There are chapters that meet in pretty much every major tech city in the world with support if you're building applications or if you're testing applications. And they do conferences, two currently international ones a year, and a bunch more local ones. Right now, I think it's the German OWASP days going on. So if you're out in that region, get out there and take a look. Otherwise, there's one in North America and one in Europe. North America tends to switch East Coast, West Coast, and the European one is whatever beautiful city happens to be hosting us. I think
Mm.
the next one is in, I don't want to make a mistake. I think it's Barcelona, but I'm not sure.
Okay,
It
Barcelona is a
was
lovely
in
city.
Portugal. It is.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, something that might be confusing to some folks when they're hearing about securing applications and like the top 10 and then AVS. What's the difference between what OWASP is doing and like the concept of like DevSecOps or SecDevOps, whichever way you want to arrange that sec in the word?
Yeah. At one point, I had a tagline that said, "There's no such thing as DevSecOps. There's only DevOps done right, because Sec sits in Dev and it sits in operations." But so OWASP is all about the whole product life cycle, right? So somebody comes up with some ideas, and those ideas turn into code in some magical way that involves coffee. And then that code gets deployed in some magical way that generally involves some kind of pipelines. And then users use those applications, they use those ideas, they're able to get the value out of what was originally thought of. OWASP covers that entire spectrum. When you talk about DevSecOps, there's actually two OWASP projects that sit in that space. One of which is the SAM, the Software Assurance Maturity Model, and that kind of helps you to measure the maturity that your DevOps practices have, your secure DevOps practices have. The other is actually a project that I'm one of the co-leaders on, which is the PSCF, the Product Security Capability Framework. And if you go to prods.ec, thank you to the people of Ecuador for allowing us to register prods in their country. So ProdSec, and that's where the details of the Product Security Capability Framework can be found. Essentially, it's what kind of capabilities do you need to have in your DevSecOps, in your SDLC, in order to produce secure code in a secure way. Because obviously there's two parts to that.
So
Um,
you just mentioned a great acronym there, which anyone that's been studying for like CISP or any of the kind of the inch deep mile wide type certifications, software development lifecycle, and you already mentioned how all OWASP targets from kind of cradle to grave, the whole from
yeah.
beginning from idea to actual implementation and used by users, right? Well, if someone is watching this that is not like, we're talking to each other, we're talking as experts to each other, and we're kind of in the
Mhm.
know, right? We're preaching to the choir, right? But for anyone that's watching this, that really this is brand new to them, it's Greek to them. What would be the way where you would say, why is having secure code important? Because, maybe kind of bring that into context of why it's important and what would be like the most common things we see in spite of all the work that OWASP does and the DevSecOps community does, and everybody's trying to make secure code because no one wants to have bad code or vulnerable code is the better word I'll use. So, why is this important? And the second part of the question is what are the common mistakes that people are still making in spite of all the information and the wealth of knowledge?
So I'll start with saying I actually preferred bad code than insecure code, because fundamentally, code with vulnerabilities is code with bugs, is the same as bad quality code, right? It's not, I'm not saying that the developer who wrote it was wanting to be bad about it, wanted to do a terrible job at it, but any security vulnerability is just the same as any scaling issue that code might have. And it's the same type of problem, right? Whether you're writing code that doesn't multiply out very well, doesn't scale very well, or whether you're building services that don't allow you to scale to take on a much bigger demand, or that are slow in their reasoning, slow in their calculations, or you're writing code that is manipulatable by an end user, a malicious end user, to make it vulnerable. It's all the same things, right? It's code, because it's hard. Writing code is hard. Turning human ideas into machine ones and zeros that computers will execute flawlessly without ever making a mistake, that's impossible. So I prefer bad code because it's a quality issue. Security is
Mhm.
just a quality issue.
Okay, I like that perspective.
It's actually so the ISO 25010, which is the ISO standard on software quality, actually lists all of these things, right? Whether it's, firstly, it starts with functional suitability, right? The code must do what it should,
Mhm.
and it should perform, it should scale, it should be translatable, as in you should be able to move it from one service to another. And then security comes into it. So there's a whole bunch of things until we get to security. The ISO 25010 is worth taking a look at some point.
And we'll try
Too
to have a
few
link for
devs have read it.
that
Yeah.
document in the description. You mentioned the whole thing about functionality, right? And when I talk to people, like when I'm trying to teach them a little bit about software security, it always comes up about, function versus features, right? And
Mhm.
so the general concept is, like you said, let's take a flashlight app that you load on your phone to turn a light on your phone. And you need to
Yep.
be able to open the app, push a button, the light comes on, right? And that's the function. But then there might be a feature. Maybe it will have your light strobe. It will have your light, do different sequences, if you will, or maybe it'll add music or whatever to the function of the phone, the app of the turning the light on. And so what I try to explain to people, as you add anything you add to it, it's adding a code. And as you add code, you could potentially either open up avenues of attack, if you will. You can also,
Mhm.
generally speaking, I tell them you increase your attack surface potentially, or you shift the avenues and ways that someone can exploit and use that code to pivot into like the system that the app is on. And so that's why I say you got to be very careful. Make sure you first, lock down your functions. And then as, people always want,
Add
can we do
features.
this? Can we also do this and do this? And they start stacking all these features. And sometimes things can get out of hand real quickly. But the second part of the question I had earlier was, what is the common things that you see time and time again in industry and with corporations and businesses and organizations that they have the information, like OWASP, the information is out there, the top 10's been out there, like you say, it
Yeah.
changes, it does shift and change to address the current landscape, but we still are getting wrong, all these years later. What are some of the things you could say that you still see?
So I think that that very firmly comes back to the top 10, right? The reason the top 10 happens every couple of years is because we gather data on it and then we publish the results. And the results are the findings, the actual vulnerabilities that have been found in systems for the last 3 years, gathered from large swathes of different parts of application development. So whether it's an IBM building code or whether it's this one guy who wrote an app that everyone uses on the Google Play Store. Across that whole spectrum, what types of vulnerabilities are we seeing? And that was actually kind of like the joining piece between your two questions was what do we mean by those vulnerabilities? Well, really, we're worried about, and you kind of said it already, we're worried about features in code, features in an application that aren't by design. So a developer hasn't said, I'm going to create this feature, but because of how things click together, that feature exists that isn't exposed to generally to the people and nobody knows it's there and it's not tested for. But a hacker, a malicious hacker, finds that feature and uses it to do the thing that feature allows him access to, or her. Those features, those malicious features, are vulnerabilities, and they're not by design. If you do things in, if you were to follow step 1, 2, and 3, then you get the result 4. But if you go 1 and then 3 and then 2, sometimes result 5 happens, and that's weird because result 5 is from a different system you shouldn't be allowed access to. And that's essentially what those are. So you talked about the SDLC as well. Those bad features ending up in your applications by accident. Those are the things we're trying to avoid. But the SDLC is the other space where things can go wrong. And it's where features in the tool set that you use can be misused to inject those features that they want down the line rather than you actually accidentally writing them or
Mhm.
creating them by plugging code together. So it's the the building a thing securely is as important as building a secure thing because you can't build a secure thing if you can't guarantee the pipelines are secure.
There's a lot of debate when it comes to developing applications and software, kind of the old adage of too many cooks can spoil the soup, right? But
Mhm.
nowadays, with the complexity of some of these applications and things that have to do call outs to different streams and sources of data, as well as be able to store temporarily all the transactional stuff that can happen within an application. What would you say is the balance between, because there's this concept of modular coding. Let's say a company like a big company like Microsoft, they're going to have like 100+ developers working on a major application, for example, and there's different teams working on different aspects of the application, right? And again, the idea is that they would, everybody's working on their piece of the code, that can work independently of each other, and then they bring it all together at some point. What are some of the dangers in that concept, even with big companies like Microsoft and other, what was like Fortune 500 level companies that are developing applications at that level?
Well, so talking about those modularizations, like the whenever there's a connector between two parts, and the connectors sit within a single class, you can have different functions, right? There, the connectors can be at very low level in the code, or they can be giant building blocks like a server talking to a database system. But whenever you have those connections between different parts, I built this and you built that. I tested this and you tested that. That's great. Neither of us has tested this yet. So wherever the gap exists, wherever there's a connection between two things, if nobody is testing those connections, then that's where those vulnerabilities can start to occur. Now, I'm not saying don't modularize code, and I'm not saying let's go monolith again. I do believe that building, a single service for file uploads in your entire system that has like 25,000 services is probably the right approach, because file uploads need to be done in a certain way. And if you do that in the right way and everyone uses the right piece of code to do that thing, you're probably better off than everyone trying to invent that wheel each time.
Every time, yeah.
But it is still something you need to test. So the big thing about those connections, about the different modules that you were referring to, when you use a module that you haven't built, you still own the responsibility for ensuring that your code works with that module the way you expect it to. So that's key, right? So ensuring that you test your whole system rather than just your part of the system.
Part, yeah. So with testing, that's a very important part of, secure software is the testing, right? And of course,
Mhm.
when people are studying about SDLC and the quality of software, they hear the term about, there's the manual code review and then you have automated code checks and reviews. And of course, the general recommendation is you don't want to blend the both, right? You don't want to be
Mhm.
all in on automated because it could maybe miss things that a human may could catch. But then to err is human, so it's like the developer can't QA QC his own code. You need kind of like that independent validation, right? But what would you recommend to companies and businesses, when they're trying to strike that balance? Because nowadays, AI is all the rage, right? Every
Mhm.
conference I've been to in the past couple of years has been 90% AI topics, and it's kind of getting kind of old hat is the way the term I'd use it, because it's just it's as beautiful as it enables for generational stuff, it's still got a ways to go, right? But then
Mhm.
I caution people like Microsoft. They were talking about their automated incident response AI systems, and I caution for companies to still have human oversight into these systems before you start, making automated actions that could disrupt regular business operations. And what was funny about that, that was in July at a cyber summit in Germany. A
Mhm.
week later, in the central South American region of Azor, they did have a denial of service that was executed by their automated incident response
Yep.
AI. And of course, they were testing in that region because that region does not have nearly the demand as North America and Europe or Asia. That would have been disastrous for Microsoft. But it just shows you that we're still, automation is great, but then there's still the human oversight I think we still need. What are your thoughts on that with AI being able to, one, generate code to include malicious code, which is a big concern for a lot of folks. But as far as using AI, leveraging it to augment the automated code checking.
AI is a huge, huge topic. And I like to talk about AI in terms of AI changes the world for us the same way that the internet changed the world when we came from the BBS systems, right? So it's going to have a massive impact on everything. But very specifically to the question you had around testing, I don't write and I haven't written a single unit test by hand in nearly 2 years now. Pretty much ChatGPT writes all of the unit tests, right? Use an LLM to write your unit tests. Most of the code I write is open source, so that's fine, because that's the other big problem, right? Plugging a bunch of your code into an AI that's public, and then it uses it to help generate tests or write code for other people. That's terrible. But yeah, so using AI for the automated stuff is great. That's a great balance. but there's nothing like a pen tester. Um, there are some really, really good, and I don't want to name names, but there's some really, really good automated pen test systems out there. But even they recommend that you augment their capabilities with humans who are curious monkeys who will find ways in.
Yes.
Um, there is nothing like a human with a desire to prove that he's better than a system
Hmm.
to getting it. And pen testers are never going to go anywhere, right? They're going to be a requirement forever. But you're right, you need a balance.
Need a balance.
You can't pay the world's best pen testers enough money to spend all their time working on your systems. So the problem with pen testing with humans is that it is a very linear return on investment. The more money you have, the more money you can afford to spend, the more time you're buying from a more seasoned or more specialized resource to do the testing you require. And the problem is that you can't spend all your money on that because you need to spend it on other things.
Hmm.
So, yeah, my suggestion, automate everything you can, use LLM for that because they're really good at writing automated code, writing automated tests. And then make sure that you have a pen tester come in and review what the LLM's done, maybe based off of threat modeling you've done so that you've got some good idea of where you think the meaty things are for them to spend the best, well, best spend the most of their time on. Um, and make sure that they do that against something like the ASVS so that you're getting a report from person A that in 12 months' time you can compare with person B, who's a different individual with a different view on things, who's focused on the same sort of threat model or the maybe the adjusted threat model as your application and your users have developed. But you could still at least compare the two pen tests because otherwise you have no idea whether you've got better results or worse.
Yeah. I compare it to first person shooters, right? When you play in
Mhm.
like just a regular pickup group and you're just running through the game trying to, to do whatever objectives you're doing in a first person shooter. And if you're playing against bots, eventually they have certain routines that they're going to run. They're going to
Yeah.
respond given how you act. They're going to do certain limited, what I call limited responses. And it may
Mhm.
hone in on to your behavior a little bit to a degree. But the human element is always like, why did that guy just do that? And the fact that you could get confused because it's out of the ordinary or unorthodox, that's where the human element comes in. And that's where I think it makes things interesting. That's why people much rather play against other human players than bots in a video game. So I love that the human element is still very important into like, pen testers, again, we don't have nearly, enough pen testing happening on networks and systems and so forth. I know, Grant, we could talk for hours about software security, and I know your time's very valuable. And so I want to. This is my favorite question I ask every guest, but if we went in a time machine and went back to the younger version of yourself, where it was day one when you decided that you wanted to get into security and go all in into this field, what's the story behind it? Do you have a story that you could share about your day one?
So my day one wasn't I wanted to get into security. My day one was I didn't want to get another hiding from my dad. And I'll tell you why. Because it was pre-internet. We were doing BBSs. And I was living in Cape Town, South Africa. And all the interesting things were either in the UK or in Canada or in the United States or in the Netherlands. All the interesting BBS systems were in those parts of the world, which meant an international telephone call into a system on a, I don't know, a 24 baud modem.
Very
And it
slow.
would take hours to download that text file that I wanted to read. And international phone calls from Cape Town were expensive, very expensive. So the first month that I discovered BBSs in the other parts of the world that were amazing, I got the hiding of my life because my dad got a telephone bill that was through the roof. So my mission was to find a way that my dad didn't get that bill. And to find a way to get free phone calls led me to phreaking, and
Yes,
phreaking
freaking.
led me to the rest of the internet, the rest of security. My first like real security job actually only happened much later. Much later. I got involved with ops and with building systems and writing code long before security was like a primary role for me. But yeah, it started with not wanting to get another hiding. That's it.
That's a wonderful story. Inspiration can come from anywhere, including a whooping. Uh,
Yep.
in your journey, are there anybody that like mentors or people that you looked up to? As you got started along the journey. This is not really meant to be a name drop session, but it's more of to pay homage to the people that inspired you, that you learned from as you grew in your career.
Absolutely. I was very fortunate to get involved with the DEF CON group, DEF CON conference, and the people at DEF CON many, many years ago. I've managed to serve now 12 years as a goon at DEF CON. So this is going back 15, 20 years. So there are tons of people who got up on stage. There are a couple of names that I could drop that I could talk about, but the ones that I'm going to name are going to be the ones that are no longer with us.
Okay.
Because the ones that are still with us, they're still out there doing cool things. They're not done yet. So,
Okay.
but Dan Kaminsky, he's right up there.
Mhm.
Moxie Spike. These guys really just amazing, amazing people who I was very fortunate to actually meet in person and share ideas with. And they were also both, as with a lot of that community, despite them being rock stars to us, quite happy to sit down with this
Yeah.
gangly teenager and talk him through what they were doing and how they were thinking. So
I mean,
yeah,
I love that they were so generous with their time and
yeah,
their knowledge and sharing it. That's really the true hallmark of a great leader, a thought leader, and someone leading carrying the torch, right? Because a lot of people with tech people, they think that they become very narcissistic or self serving or self absorbed. But to hear stories of these, great people that inspired you, that's thank you for sharing that. Um, one of the things I like to do is talk about, nonprofits and volunteer work because, there's the day job, and then there's what we do for our free time, but then there's the things we choose to help our communities, help, the society and so forth. Is there any volunteer work or nonprofits that you're involved in?
yeah. So other than OWASP, which obviously is also volunteer work with a nonprofit, I do very very much like to give back to my community. I'm involved with I'm on the advisory board for a couple of companies, but one of them is actually called the RIG. So it's the Retired Investigators Guild. They are doing work with criminal activities that have cold cases where police organizations have not been able to come to a conclusion in those cases. They've got a bunch of retired investigators, very seasoned police officers who understand how to uncover things, applying new techniques, new forensic capabilities that now exist to those old cases to try and resolve some of them for the families. So the RIG, they're very close to my heart. I'm also involved as an advisory board member for an organization called the Cyber Helpline. They are actually based here in the United Kingdom, although they're starting to talk about creating versions of themselves in other parts of the world, Canada and the United States being on that list. Um, and they essentially provide cyber crime assistance to
Wow.
individuals and to small organizations, small businesses who don't really have the capabilities to deal with a malware attack or worse, cyber stalking and all that harassment that happens online. So, the cyber helpline are very, very heavily involved with that. And I got involved with the cyber helpline because I'm also involved with policing my local community. I'm a special constable with the Metropolitan Police.
Wow.
And
Nice.
some of my work there is with the cyber teams, about half the work I do with them. And the other half of the work that I do with them is either in uniform or helping with actual investigations, fetching CCTV footage and reviewing it for whatever purposes. Um, but yeah, those three are kind of the ones that I'd like
Wow.
to
My
highlight.
hat's off to you, Grant. I mean, you already have a very busy and demanding work that you do in cyber already. And then these other hats that you're wearing that's of your free time, again, speaks to the level and caliber of human being that you are. So thanks for being such a great, wonderful human being to give of your time and energy. One of the things you mentioned, and I do, please make sure I have these links because I want to put them in the
Will
description.
do.
So anyone watching, check out these great nonprofits and the great work that they're doing for society and communities around the world. Um, but thank you, Grant, for giving of your time. That is, again, generous of you to do so. Um, I do like to take a moment to kind of go through, we've talked a lot of serious stuff about, application security, OWASP, and we've talked now about some great nonprofit work you're doing. But I like to have a moment where I kind of do what I call my quick speed round of questions, and there's no right or wrong answer. Just the first thing that comes to your mind. And if you're ready, we'll start.
Sure, this sounds like a Warshak test, which there are wrong answers,
Okay.
but go for it.
We'll start with the easy one. Star Wars or Star Trek?
Star Trek.
Star Trek. Okay.
Science and
Cake-
technology versus religion and politics. Come
Religion.
on, it's
Okay.
got a
I like it. I like the perspective. All right. Cake or pie?
pie.
What kind of pie?
I For me it would have to be a savory pie, right? I'm
Savory pie?
thinking US. Yeah. So the reason not cake, cake is great, and then you ruin it by baking it. Cake batter is fantastic, and I feel the same way about cookies, by the way. Cookie dough,
Okay.
absolutely.
Is a hot dog a sandwich?
This is a good question. I would have to say yes because it's between two pieces of bread.
Okay. So what is your most favorite book of all time? I see you have a background there of lots of books and bookshelves, but what is your favorite book of all time that you've ever read? And what's the last book you've read?
So the last book I've read is I'm currently rereading the Expanse series. So I've got, I don't know, the book 6 or 7 is the one that I'm currently working on my Kindle. Um, my favorite book, fiction or nonfiction?
It's your choice. Your favorite book of all time. When I asked the question, something must have popped in your head.
So Accelerate. And I probably have a copy. Yep, I do have a copy on my desk.
Well, that makes it a favorite book.
There we go.
Nice.
So this is Nicole Forsgen, Jess Humble, and Gene Kim. Very much a workbook, though. This is the science of lean software and DevOps.
Well, there it is, a man that truly lives and breathes his profession. Um, I know we did talk about some nonprofit and volunteer work, but are there any other projects or initiatives or things that you're working on that you would like to shine a light on for that you're involved in yourself?
Well, so I mentioned the product security capability framework being one of the OWASP projects that I'm heavily involved with. Essentially, that is the distillation of my two business partners and so Toby, Andrew, and I have kind of put together our approach to building secure SDLCs and helping organizations build secure software. It's been open sourced as an OWASP project. We've gotten a bunch of community members helping to contribute to it now. It's essentially mapping the things you should be doing against different compliance frameworks that you know how much of those things you need to do to meet the compliance requirement for ISO 27000 or for GDPR or for whatever, for NIST, whatever the standard might be. But there's a lot of work to do. So if you're keen to get involved in an OWASP project and you don't write code, because there's a lot of projects that are code projects, but if you're keen to get involved and you understand how to map things together and you understand how to explain things, but don't necessarily know how to write code, please reach out. That project desperately needs help. We've got tons of work to do and we would love to get everyone involved in that.
So, in closing, if someone that's watching this video, that's watching right now and listening to us talk here, and they wanted to kind of dip their toes into the water of, secure software development, the OWASP, what would be the one site, obviously OWASP site, but is there
Yeah.
training that's available for people that want to dip their toes in to start getting more, knowledgeable about this part of industry?
So there's a lot of training in AppSec, right? There's lots of companies providing training. My company provides training in AppSec, but I think the best way to dip your toe in is probably to go to the link that I'll get across to you, Jim, which is the invite to the OWASP Slack channels, and then jump onto Slack and go look at the projects there that catch your attention. There are 280 odd projects, from working in LIM, defining the privacy concerns around that, all the way through to actually writing code to get involved with plugins for OWASP SAP or for what formerly known as OWASP SAP.
Wow.
there's tons of things there, but the best place is to join us on Slack because we're first and foremost a community, and then have a look in that community to see what things draw your attention, the things that spark your interest, and then get
Love
involved in those. Project leaders are all there; they're all talking. It's a great community, and even Zap, even Simon is still in that channel, still talking to people who are working on Zap. That's another great project still be involved in.
And I love that recommendation because having people actually connect with other people and people that are, more advanced or more knowledgeable and having kind of that guidance and that sense of community is really very important, especially when someone's just starting out. They don't want to feel lost or alone or don't know which direction to go in. So kind of joining a conversation and joining maybe a team working towards something. I love that approach. So great recommendation there, Grant. Grant, unless you have any other closing statements about the security, application security, I know your time is precious, and consider this an open invite to come back to the podcast at any time that you'd love to. It's been great having this conversation with you, and all the links and the things we talked about, Grant will make sure he gets them to me. They're in the description below. You don't have to Google search it; it's right there below. Check it out, especially check those nonprofit and charity organizations that Grant has mentioned because they're doing great work. And again, that says everything about who Grant is as a human being. Beyond the cyber and the security stuff, the fact that he's given of his time is a selfless thing that a human being can do. And that puts him in a rare category because we're in a world today where everybody's so self-centered, narcissistic because of social media. Me, and look at me, look at what I'm wearing, look at where I'm traveling to, look at what my breakfast looks like. We're in such this kind of conditioned society, and you have a man here that's given of his time, not just to one, but three. And I think that's very commendable. But Grant, thank you so much for your time, and
My
hope
pleasure, Jim.
to
Thank you.
see more great things from you in the near future.
Likewise, and we'll definitely be in contact again. Thank you.
Thank you.